Welcome back. We're on Ideas Exchange and we're talking about Ghana Beyond Aid. And my guests are Dr. Orleans Lindsay, an economist and a lawyer, and Mr. Emmanuel Asiedu, the Chief Executive of Gratis. And we've been having quite an engaged conversation. You can join us on our social media handles, Ideas Exchange GH. It's one word, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And you'll see our WhatsApp number scrolling on the screen in front of you. Dr. Orleans Lindsay, I'm sure that you have some perspectives on what Mr. Asiedu has said, but let me also add another question to your consideration. When we talk about job creation and investment, do you think that the role of government is to be a direct investor? Or do you think that the role of government is to be a facilitator for private sector investment?
Thank you.
And given that some of our experiences with government financing private sector businesses have not lived up to our expectations, let me put it that way, what do you think we need to do differently if we are going to encourage private sector development, effectively enterprise development and job creation in order to move to a Ghana away from aid?
Excellent. Good. I believe that the role of the government is just to be a facilitator, because the funds the government get, they're not for the government. These are people's tax revenues, and the government ought to ensure that the funds are used efficiently, i.e. into areas where the returns from the investment are bigger than the costs. Most of the time, we tend not to do that. If the government wants to provide a job, it means that the government is going to go into business, going to decide that this type of job is the right thing to do. It is not the business of the government to do that. Clearly, you see, when you're going into business, the interesting thing is the objective that you seek to pursue. You need to be focused on that objective. The government, objective, it's so many. It's not one. It's not that focused. Therefore, this is why all over the world, governments getting into business, it tends not to work as well as the private sector. The private sector is strictly interested in its profit. Of course, you might think, profit is not necessarily a good thing, but it is that which somebody may want to forgo the income, invest and do things. And interestingly, a long time ago, Adam Smith said, even the private sector seeking to maximize their selfish interests ultimately end up maximizing the social good. We've had it in Britain that used to have a lot of these things in the past. I think in Ghana, all the government needs to do, if they want to even get into business, is to clearly decide that the projects they are going to do have the benefits, whether it's social they're looking at, and that's the only thing they need to get involved in, that the social benefits and the costs, as well as the private benefits, don't coincide. And where the social benefits are bigger than the private benefits, then the government may come in. But still, on those bases, you still need to make a decision that the benefits we are going to get, and you can impute even revenues in terms of returns, you can impute it. So long as the returns are bigger than the cost of doing it, you can do it. If it's not, don't do it. There might be a better way to do it. And you need to look at the better ways. And the better way may not necessarily be the private sector exclusively. It may be the public-private sector in concert. And then you need to know what you need to do as a government so as to help the private sector to do it. But to think that the government is the only entity that can provide jobs is very wrong. And that is where we are today. Because most of the time, I tend to hear a lot of politicians say, oh, we did it. You did it if you use your own money. If you use a private sector or if you use public funds to do it, you didn't do it. You took the right decisions. Yes, but you didn't do it. So we need to be very clear. And that's why I'm saying that even what the government is doing, we need to look at what the government can do and do it better, but not think that the government is the one that can do everything. On the area of trying to invest in or giving scholarships or giving all those, it's good. In some areas, even if you give the scholarship, what you might be thinking, or what you ought to be thinking, is that the benefits you get from that person is bigger than the cost. That has to be the criteria. If it's not it, then it's a waste of time. There are other ways to do it. You could set up, for instance, long-term investment programs where, or financing sources, and then give them that objective that they should invest into areas where the returns are bigger than the cost. You will end up better than the government itself trying to do it, because ultimately, when the government is allocating funds, because they have so many interests, so many pressures coming in, the funds oftentimes are not targeted to where they want to. So I would say the government should get out of businesses that they cannot run. If they can do so, fine. And there's a criteria to choose which areas the government can do. As I said, where there are externalities and there are uncertainties, even uncertainties, it means that the right information is not out there for the private sector to take the decision. So if the government has got that information, provide that information, let the private sector do it. The problem is not that the government should not do these things aside. It's just that we don't have enough funds. We don't have enough resources to do it. Coming even into the area of funding, when I look at the role that the government can do, at the moment we don't have an effective domestic capital market. When we think about it, you go and borrow funds for 30%. Most of the time, 3 years. Who is going to, you go and borrow 30% and you have to pay within 3 years. How are you going to generate enough money to do that? Unless you go into trading, you're not going to get into long-term investment. Therefore, what the government can do, strictly look at even the land system that we have. Provide a proper framework, because at the moment, we're only helping those working in the lands department. We need to have a system where the registration and the transfer of funds is transparent. When somebody uses the assets to borrow and they cannot pay, sad as it may be, the decision must be such that they are taken away and people start thinking, the mentality changes. And I'm looking for a framework where if we were to actually securitize housing for 30 years, you will see that ultimately other options, other financial instruments will come in 30 years, 20 years, 10. And because we have an active land market here, I think that is where we need to do so as to reduce the borrowing costs. Once the borrowing costs come down, and then the maturity structure is increased, we will see the private sector going. So that is what the government can do. Instead of just pussyfooting and saying, we're going to do the USAID of a land administration project, it's not being done. I mean, as far as I know, even the land registration system was set up back in the 1990s. It's not been done. It's not been completed. In Cape Coast, we don't even have a proper land registration system, well, as we have in Accra. If you transfer in, that's another problem. So what the government can do is to get into the sort of things it can do. Like here, land administration, for instance, look at it. Clean up that system. Make everything transparent, let the private sector do it. And I am more than willing to go into further to show how we can reduce the cost of borrowing. But this rate of 30% at very short-term borrowing, listen, I don't think we are going to get out of where we are.
I can see that you quite agree with Hernando de Soto and his book, Debt Capital.
Oh, yes.
But I'd like to ask you a follow-up question then, Dr. Efame. So we've talked about the priorities for government and where government's intervention can be most useful. Mm-hmm. And from your contribution, essentially, it is about setting up structures instead of making direct investments. Now, there are some instances where particular public goods and services need to be provided. However, government has thought of providing them by way of public-private partnerships. And sometimes public-private partnerships are used as vehicles, either for the provision of services or for investment in infrastructure. What is your take on public-private partnerships and financing government's investments and initiatives through that mechanism in order to move away from having increased debt? Yeah. And given that our experience has been that even with a lot of these PPPs, there is the demand for government guarantees, which essentially, disturbs our debt profile. How do we do this differently in order to be able to maximize the benefits from those arrangements?
Excellent. When I look at public-private partnership, the first question I ask, what is the role of the individual parties? What is the role of the government in the PPP? The government needs to understand what can it provide to the private sector to do the job. Most of the time, it comes to the decision of uncertainty information, for instance, where you don't have the appropriate information. The government can be able to put together, the information, package it, and sell the information. Look at the road system we have. It is not the business of the government to set up roads everywhere. You can set up, yes, the local roads, the feeder roads can be done even at the district level. The urban roads, the interregional roads can be told. But oftentimes the information is not there to know the traffic rates so as to make those decisions. If we're going into these sort of areas, the government must be clear that we are going to go in as a business. We are providing something to the private sector. And know what they can do. Most of the time it's going to be information, or even in land areas, for instance, getting the communities or sorting out the land problem. Because, if you look at land, for instance, it's not only owned by one entity, it's owned by so many different groups of people. The government comes in, does those things, packages this and sells it to the private sector to do. So that way, the government doesn't necessarily have to provide guarantees that, of course, the private sector will have to always want something cheap. So, yes, the government ought to do it. No. The government, if it provides the sort of services that become necessary and complement the private sector, they can do so without necessarily providing any guarantee to anybody, and the private sector can do it. Because all a bank wants to do, all a financier wants to do, is that they provided the funds, they've generated enough revenues, and they're able to pay the costs that are this. And if they can't do it, they won't do it. And therefore, if they can't do it, the business is not worth doing. Let somebody else do it. So what I'm thinking is that the government needs to be very clear in everything it goes. As a business, what role, what information, what service are they providing that is needed by the other side? Because often I've sat down in some discussions, public-private sector, elsewhere, right, where the government comes in with the right information. So we know we can't do it. The private sector can't do it. Therefore, the government, so we know. So if the government says we're looking for 30%, we understand it. But when I come to Ghana, for instance, I sit down. The government doesn't provide it. So we'll provide land. I can go to my home and discuss land issues and solve those issues. I don't need the government. The information and the sort of red tapes and those things can be sorted out. It is those that are needed for the private sector to appreciate. And then the government can be able to get its own shares. And then those revenues can come in from there. That's what I will.
Mr. Asiedu, I can see that now you're the one who has been listening patiently, waiting for your opportunity to contribute.
Because you asked the question about whether government should be the financier or facilitator. I always ask my question, what facilitation are we talking about? And what is government? And we have been facilitating all this while. What has been the results of this facilitation that we have been doing? When the cost of capital, like he mentioned, is about 30%, 35%. In fact, I was on Radio XYZ at in Alisa Hotel. And when one of the managing directors of one of the bank said, if they like you, then you get 35%. Even as a December or November, if you are very liked, 35%. How can a private sector borrow at 35% and be able to make it? And like you're saying, then you do buy and selling. You will not be able to do anything. And buy and selling, you are creating jobs for some other people. Revenues are generated there. Taxes are paid over there. If we want to do it here, that financing issue should be solved. And that's why I see we asked about public-private partnership. I think that the role of government in the PPP should be the finances. Government should be able to provide the finances for the people to set it up and work. And then, but the actual work and the running the money will be done by the private sector. Let me give you an example of Ariton. I think you know about Root and Tuber Improvement and Marketing Program where we worked with. There is this woman in Mampong, Josma. When the Ariton project came on, she was doing things with her hands and what have you. 100% sponsorship was given to her, provided all the equipment she needed. Immediately, within 1 or 2 months, her production shot from 1 bag per day to 8. And then she started employing more people. Now she's been able to buy even more than the machines we give her herself. She's been able to grow the business. She's been able to buy machines herself to do several things. The same thing happened around Techiman. We went there, people were only 45 there. Our team provided all the equipment and everything for them to work. Recently, we went there, there were 700 people working there. They built their own houses. They've sent their children to school. Now, they didn't need anybody's assistance. But the initial stages, funds were provided for them. They didn't need to pay loans. We have an experience in Volta region when some group of women were led to take bank.
Just a minute, for the benefit of our viewers. Essentially, what you are talking about are micro and small enterprise development support schemes.
Yes.
Because that's what the RTIM was about, the Roots and Tubers Improvement Project. So we've had a number of those.
Yeah.
As you know, we've had the Rural Enterprises Project as well that has also looked to support people at the micro and small enterprise level, creating their own businesses, becoming self-employed, and generating development within their communities. When we talk about job creation, beyond looking at the micro and small, because especially when you're talking about large-scale industrialization, large-scale industrialization doesn't only involve the provision of equipment, it's the development of value chains.
I agree.
And investment into the value chains.
I agree.
When we look at public-private partnerships, there must be the whole idea of people working and putting their best efforts into getting something done is that everybody should have some skin in the game.
Yes.
So if government is providing the financing and therefore government is therefore taking the risk, what is the contribution of the private sector partner?
First, I'm not only talking about micro, I just use that as an example. And even at the macro level that I was talking about, I was giving an example in Volta region, when people were encouraged to go to the banks for them to take money. At a point in time, I think about 3 or 6 months, they abandoned the whole facility because their point was that they were working for the bank. Every day they go, I don't know the amount, all that they've generated go to pay for the loans. Even at the highest level, I told you that in Germany, when they started industrialization, most of the industries, as we were told when I was studying over there, that they were sponsored, Damacluster and Opel, they were sponsored 100%. They were given, it can be, sometimes they provide from land to building to equipment to everything you require. And then you work. As they continue there, they are able to open up new ones. So what I'm talking about is not just a micro level. Even if it is 10 million, 20 million investment, that's the things I'm talking about. Such investments can generate more jobs and people can be employed and a lot of things can be done. My sister, I bet you, if we continue the way we are going about it, say if you continue to do the things the same you're doing, the same way you're doing it, you never get the results. If we continue to do it the same way we are doing it, we may still have the same problem. When we live in the country, I think we are either the third or fourth in the whole world when it comes to interest rate. I mean, the other interest rate. If private sector is to borrow and then continue to do business in this environment, it will take us a very long time. Without this Ghana beyond AIDS may just be rhetoric. And we need to actually, government should be able to take decisions, assist people, and be able to set up the industries, let private sector run it, and let's see how economic system will be generated in the country.
So, in a situation where government's revenue generation at the moment, as we have already discussed, is limited, if government is to take the risk, the financing risk, to be able to support investment into these businesses, essentially, where government is not generating the revenue itself, it means government is borrowing and taking on the risk. The question is this. We have had some of those interventions before. We've had the Ghana Venture Capital Fund, all right, where the investment was in equity, and therefore government was taking on the financial risk. We've had the Ghana Export and Development Investment Fund, which has now become Ghana Exim. And you remember that the way in which that was structured was that the maximum interest rate that was going to be charged by the banks was 12%, not 30%. And some businesses have been beneficiaries of those investments. The challenge that we have had with our previous experience in Ghana is the tendency for some private sector players, once they have government facilities, not to treat the repayment of those facilities with the same seriousness as they would have done if they were getting the money from a bank. Because the belief
But
is
there is
that
a solution.
because the belief is that government is very unlikely to go into execution to recover assets in order to satisfy the debt. And indeed, it comes with its own political machinations, but that's another discussion. So if we are going to adopt your suggestion and encourage investment into private sector
Yeah.
businesses,
Yeah.
not just developing factories, but actually investing into the whole value
Yes.
chain. And we are asking government to take on the risk and to take on the debt, which debt, by the way, we all are going to pay for eventually through our taxes.
Yes.
Question to ask is, what do we do differently from the way we have been implementing it up until now
Good.
to minimize the risk and to ensure that the intended outcomes are achieved?
Good. The solution is that the countries that have done that, all of the fellow, the private sector running it, pays himself. We determine your salary. You don't take you don't dip your hand into anything without approval. You always have a government official who countersigns every check. And daily online, real time, all of you are made to let's say Ghana Commercial Bank. And then all transactions that go on is being monitored at any particular time by somebody sitting up there. And so your revenue and your expenditure are constantly and daily checked. Anything you pay shows immediately. So the private sector hasn't got the luxury for him to determine whether he pays or not. And at the end of the period, we'll be able to determine how much you made in a month, how much you made in a year. And so at the end of the year, they sit down with them. This was your income. This was your expenditure. So you are being able to make, let's say, this amount of profit. So henceforth, you're going to pay this amount of money every month. Meanwhile, the money, because the money is not yours, and then all the money with the risk, the investment that was invested in you, you will pay eventually. Because it's out of when we have monitored you, even 1 year moratorium, 2 year moratorium, realize that you're able to make less 100,000 every year. We pay 80,000 of that as payment for money that was invested in you. So the money that is invested in you doesn't go waste. Government is able to recruit all his money from every investment that is done, but you are monitored. The accountants who countersign the checks, you are changed almost every 4 months or every 3 months, so that no compromise comes in. And anybody who finds wanting is prosecuted and jailed. I mean, no compromise of if we find you doing anything, you are jailed. You know, some countries, even presidents are put before the law. And those you'll be jailed. I mean, the law work. So the private sector who have taken that government revenue hasn't got the luxury to say, I won't pay. You are being monitored every day. And so you pay.
Dr. Lindsay, what's your take? Government taking on the risk to invest in?
What he is saying, look, I've lived here in Ghana since the 60s, and I know what's happened in Ghana. And I know at Champions time when we were investing Operation Feed Yourself, sending funding agriculture and all that, and what happened? You're assuming that the government has got players who would definitely do what they asked to do. They have clear objective and they will pursue them to the letter. It doesn't work that way.
But we can create it.
No. I'm just saying it doesn't work that way.
I agree.
Most of the time, when somebody runs into a difficulty, we all have ways. This is Ghana. Everybody knows somebody else. Such that those taking to take the hard decisions will not take the hard decisions. We don't have the time to waste. If the government is going to take money, which somebody else has paid, and by the way, I will not pay my taxes if the government is going to misuse it. Somebody will take that decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, you need to take a decision that the money that's going to be put in, it's going to be put in and then recoup more money than what has been put in. Most of the time, these things you're talking about, the monitoring and all, they could be better done elsewhere. There are so many ways of doing better things. But to say the government coming in as a financier, so is it coming in as a bank or as a shareholder? In what role is he coming in? In some of the countries that you're talking about, for instance, if you look at the management layers, okay, when you put in funding, you sit on the board.
Yeah.
and you get to know what is happening.
Yeah.
Okay, but it is not the government. The government hasn't got the people to be doing those things.
Why can't we get the people?
No. Wait, hold on. We've had, because look, we've done this in the past.
Yes.
We have to do something different.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that given that we do not have enough revenue to be able to do these sort of things, put them to waste. Just look at, Operation Feed Yourself at that time, when people were supposed to take loans for agriculture at very subsidized rates. And most of the funds that were taken didn't go into agriculture, but went into trading. Okay? I'm saying that the monitoring that you're talking about, if we sit down as a theoretical framework and say, oh yeah, it should be done, yes, that's nice, but it doesn't work.
Brother, some people have done it. I'm not cutting you.
No, I'm not saying that.
Some people have done it. You see, I'm not cutting you, but my point is that we can't also continue the way we are doing it. We need to, if we worked, it didn't work. You know, the man who made the light, he tried 1,000 times, it didn't work. The 1001 Edison, and then it worked. If we try something that doesn't work, let's see why it didn't work. Let us find means.
You see, let me ask.
I'm the moderator of the conversation.
Sorry.
You have the floor.
You see, my problem is that if you use your money,
yes,
you take a risk and you lose. That's your business. But if you're using public money,
yes,
and you waste it,
and the wasting is why you prevent it.
No. See, those things, because there's a lot of waste, there's a lot of inefficiency. We know why public sector going to do these finances will have these. That is why when we look at, and it's, the experience is there, public-private sector businesses, you will see that private sector businesses do better than public sector. It's mainly because the people in the public sector, if it is my money, the way I will wake up to go and check these things, it's not the same as if it's somebody else's money. It never happens that way. It may be nice to help in the small areas, small business loan schemes, you can do all that. In a big area, the risk could be very big. And to lose big money, it's something.
Yes.
So I'm saying that we have done this in the past. I don't want us to be going in there. We've done this in the past.
Yes.
What we haven't done is to decide, the government to decide on a business-like approach. That we are going to go into ventures, and we're going to run things like a business, i.e., the returns we're going to get should be bigger than the costs. And we look at things clearly, not with any sort of eyes. If the social benefits we're going to, there are lots of ways where you can impute values and decide. There's some other areas we can't do those things. Leave those things. Okay? The reason we say the private sector should come in is that if they take a risk and it's lost, that's their business. But if I paid my taxes and the funds have been dissipated, come on. So I'm saying that we haven't tried it. Where I'm saying we haven't tried it. What we need to do is to restrict the government to the things they can do better than the private sector. Let them do it. And then we set up a framework, proper framework, ensure the private sector does it. If they don't do it, then we know they would have used their own money and lost. So be it. We can find, but to use public money to say we're going to do this, I totally disagree on that issue.
Yes, we can disagree, and we don't need to always agree.
Of course.
But what I'm saying is that
but we also need to manage this program within.
I agree.
So, Mr. Asiedu, if I may give you my final question to you.
Yes.
And request your intervention on that matter. Essentially, in getting a Ghana beyond 8, some of the things that we have discussed essentially says that government must have priority focus areas. And within those priority focus areas, some matters should be areas, and some areas should be areas for investment. Some areas should be hived off to others who can make the investments. If we want to get to a Ghana beyond 8 sooner rather than later, from your perspective, knowing that the social investments will still have to be done anyway, we don't immediately see government going away from education or from healthcare or from providing mega infrastructure projects to help to facilitate business creation. And you have made the strong case that you believe that government should also invest in job creation. If you had the budgetary allocation of the Ministry of Trade and Industry for this year, and you were to look at the different allocations, salaries and wages, goods and services, investments, and you realize that Salaries and wages was top heavy.
Yes.
Goods and services was in the middle. Investments was slim. Would you be tempted to do something about salaries and wages, i.e., staff numbers, in order to be able to get the money to make the investments that you require into creating jobs?
I would say that when I took over Gratis, I realized that I had 4 secretaries, 15 drivers, 8 cars, and what have you. And so when I look at it, I say, look, it's not just a matter of getting people at the workplace and pay them without doing anything. Let's do restructuring. So I sent more than 100 people home. A few people were left. We are 365. We are now just 170 or so. I will need a little more. And I realized that people were there without the skills to be able to work. Government is to create jobs, but we are not just to keep people there who are around squares in squares in around the square holes. Thank you very much.
Square pegs and round holes.
Whatever. We should be able to get the right kind of people to do the right kind of government job for efficiency to thrive. As at now, in my marketing department, I have 1 PR person and about 3 engineers assisting over there. Because I realize when I'm selling what we produce, machines, we need somebody who will have understanding of the machines to be able to sell it better. Instead of just getting somebody who have just done only marketing. I will get an engineer, train him in marketing, and to be able to do that. Now, my driver is somebody with technician, but I think HND motor vehicle. So he drives and he also maintains the vehicle. So cost is being saved over there, efficiency is increased, and things are being done. We should not necessarily, because we have to create job, keep everybody there when people are not doing work. If we can be able to send some of them home and be able to use the few people to generate more income and bring out more jobs, those people who have sent home will get jobs to do.
Dr. Lindsay, from your point of view, Ghana Beyond AIDS, how do we reallocate our resources and how do we get there?
Well, as I said, if we operate as a business, we continuously assess the resources we have at our disposal. We look at the technologies out there. The fact that we may be laying them off from here doesn't mean that they cannot have jobs elsewhere. So we must continuously assess those things. I'm saying that the government sector is top heavy. Ghana Beyond Aid, if we are to have enough funds for us to pay for our own expenditures, we need to rethink the role of the government. We need to rationalize. We need to target things we can do better. By so doing, we may shed some players from elsewhere. But it doesn't mean that we can even find them better jobs elsewhere. And it is the continuous thinking about how we provide our services that would get us out of here. But this idea of the government spending is not going to work, because at some point, people will not even pay the tax revenue we are expecting them to.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think we've had a very interesting discussion. I appreciate the fact that you made your time.
Thank you.
Viewers, we've had an interesting 1 hour. My guests have been Dr. Orleans Lindsay, an economist and a lawyer, and Mr. Emmanuel Asiedu, the Chief Executive of the Gratis Foundation. We'll be with you again next week. Until then, I wish you all the best in the week ahead. Good night.
Ideas Exchange is proudly sponsored by African Life Assurance, because we care.